My name is Damon Edwards. I'm from a company called Rundeck. And just so you know, the slides are already online. There's a lot of content in the slides. So if you want to take a photo of this slide, you can also, that's my Twitter. If you want to tweet at me, I'll post the slides there as well, too. But you can get all the slides from that link. And then obviously, they'll be in the conference slide share as well. How many folks saw my talk last year? Some folks did? Good? All right, thank you. Thank you for coming, and you're still here. Appreciate it. So my thesis last year was that operations is really the last mile. It's a thing we need to unlock the full value of these DevOps transformations. All this work we're doing, we'll not get the value out of it unless we unlock and transform how we do operations. Talked a lot about the issues we have with silos, with work queues, with excessive toil, low trust. So that talk is online. The thesis this year is really digging in a little bit deeper and going to talk more about incident management. Why? Because the ability to respond and resolve incidents is the true indicator of an organization's operational capability. This is where the rubber meets the road around is how we can respond to and handle our incidents. So a little bit of a definition first, because there's a lot of definitions of what an incident is in the world. In fact, maybe even your own organization. So I look at it as an incident is an unplanned disruption impacting customers, which is pretty obvious, right? Or business operations, right? So the customer side's pretty self-explanatory. Outages, service degradation, kind of what we'd classify in the classic ITSM world around incidents. But I also look at it as unplanned disruption in our business operations, right? So work interruptions, delay, waiting, short notice requests. I'll use that for a euphemism as nobody lets you know until right when it's necessary. But all those things impact people's work. That work eventually bubbles up into delay at the delivery and business level. We are avoiding fixing technical debt, fixing problems that could avoid future problems. So to me, these disruptions and business operations end up being in some way or another in customer impacting. It's just a little more diffused. So, why would we separate these things out and say, oh, let's talk about just the outages and service degradation as one thing, and then the rest of it is something completely different? It's still the same people doing the work. We're still causing the interruption in a blast radius in the organization. So that's my definition. And quick show of hands. How many folks here actually work in operations? Okay, keep your hand up. How many of you go more than an hour without somebody interrupting you, asking you to do something or something you didn't plan for? How many can go more than 4 hours? Take your hand down if I didn't pass this. How many can go more than a week without somebody interrupting you? Anybody? Nobody? Say this is the world we live in, right? So those interruptions are just as important as anything. So the format of this talk, I'm going to talk about the life cycle of incident management and sort of how I see a lot of high-performing organizations transforming and attacking this problem. There's a lot of people I'm going to mention or reference. They may not agree with everything I'm saying. I'm not implying they're endorsing this, and there might be people I left off. Please don't tweet at me. Okay, so but before we talk about that cycle of an incident, I want to kind of talk about the context that we're living in, the stew that we're all marinating in, because I think this is very important to understand why we've arrived where we're at. The first one, digital transformation. Nobody groan, right? Please keep it to yourself. But what's going on with digital transformation? There's a lot of definitions out there, probably more than DevOps, right? And if you think about it, what's going on, it's this impulse from the board level. And I've seen enough of these communications from the board level down to the technology organization. What are they really after, right? Number one, everything's got to be integrated, right? No more of this customer service agent does something on this machine, then this window, then this window. They want to see it all integrated. They want to have one common system for things. They want things to be responsive. They don't mean web responsive, right? They mean that they want to be responsive to the industry. They want to be responsive to the competition, responsive to customer requests. They want to feel like the IT organization has that responsiveness, not that it just kind of goes into a queue and sits there forever. They want it everywhere. They want it on all the devices. They want it to happen on your mobile. They want it to happen on your laptop. They want it happening on your Siri, right? And they want things always there. It's got to be on, right? The idea of maintenance windows in 2019 are an afterthought, right? And so all this is flowing down to the technology organization. I think Cornelia Davis, one of the speakers here, does a great job in her book, Cloud Native Patterns, of breaking down, what does that look like? What does the digital transformation flow down to the technology organization look like? So that digital transformation has driven us over to this idea of these cloud native technologies, right? And there's been this explosion of new architecture, new platforms. John Willis and Kelsey Hightower are two people I follow that do a great job at deciphering what's real, what's not real. Obviously, Kelsey's a little more Kubernetes focused than most, but still does a great job of bringing out the reality. So we've seen this explosion in new platforms, but really what that has enabled is this. I don't know if you've seen this yet, these Death Star diagrams, right? So Cornell University does a great job of trying to do this visualization of microservices. This is actually for a popular online service. And so the complicated world of these microservices is exploding. And then, I think I think one of the best explainers of what this means to the companies is Adrian Cocroft, right? He did a great talk at DockerCon back in 2014, talking about that architecture enables speed, right? That really what we're after here is being able to decouple the organization. If you decouple the organization, they can move faster. Speed is that competitive advantage that is being driven down from that board level. So in the technology level, we're pushing for that decoupling. We're pushing for that speed and that ephemeral nature of our infrastructure, which has then led us all the way over to DevOps, right? Well, that's driven over how are we going to manage these people? How are we going to take advantage of all of this new infrastructure, new capabilities? We're here at Gene's party, so I might as well reference Gene here. But he brought us the 3 ways, right? Taking a lot of people's work and bringing it together and saying, look, it's about this flow, fast feedback, feedback loops. Now the Unicorn Project, we've got these 5 ideals, right? And the reality is that a lot of that has been interpreted as is it's all about dev, and it's all about the go, right? What about operations, right? Oh, that's the thing that's still burning in the background. And that was the whole point of my talk last year. So if you want to go back and watch that, it's on YouTube. But so what is that pushback, right? If we're all go, and I think that's really come in the form of the SRE movement, right? It started to provide that feedback of the system to say, what is operations response to this go nature of the DevOps world? Ben Traynor at Google, he was kind of the first person to coin the term SRE, put together the first SRE organization, but it's really following patterns that a lot of cloud native organizations are following. And they really bring about these principles, right? Like SREs need service level objectives with consequences, right? SREs have time to make tomorrow better than today. SRE teams have the ability to regulate their workload. It's all about that feedback, that when everything's go towards ops, how do you provide that feedback to stay in control? And folks like Tom Lemoncelli, Stephen Thorne, Liz Fong-Jones, Niall Murphy, all people I follow in this area who are doing a great job of really kind of surfacing what's special about this new world. And there's a third O'Reilly book called Seeking SRE, which I'm going to plug because I actually wrote a chapter in it. So I think it's the best SRE book yet. So, but really, if you start to put this together, right, what's actually happening here? If you see that what's going on is things like our product, not project. If you're here for Mick's talk, you got a lot of that, right? Continuous delivery, shifting left, air budgets, toil limit, cloud native technology, so on and so forth. It's really building this self-regulating system, right? We're breaking down our world, decoupling into these horizontal streams like Adrian was talking about, and we're really building self-regulating horizontal systems here. It's John Hall from BMC who's actually kind of the first person to really point that characteristic out to me. And whether you're in these pure cross-functional teams or you've still got a classic dev and ops organization, it's about these building value-aligned self-regulating systems and building shared responsibility models between people in, I'm using air quotes here, dev roles or ops roles to balance out that work. Now, let's compare this to kind of what a lot of us grew up in, right? Which is more of a traditional ITSM focus to the world, right? Where everything was about a process, right? And the process got a process owner. That process had inputs, outputs, triggers, metrics. What do? We assigned them, some up-and-coming manager saying, this is your process, right? Here's your metrics, here's your triggers, here's your outcomes we want. Go manage that thing, right? And they, sharp elbows, are going to manage that thing to the best of their ability. They will be the best firewall, rule changers west of the Mississippi, right? And then you get something like ITIL from, starting in like '89. purely defined 26 of these, or formally defined 26 of these processes. Now they call them practices, right? What ends up happening is, oh, then on top of that, forgot this notion of change authority, that there's some external body that's granting the authority for you to make change. Somebody else is going to tell you whether or not your change is going to be correct, or they'll say, oh, we'll just bring it to us and we'll sort of give you advice on it. But in general, the idea of authority is flowing from some place, right? And what happens here is with that idea of these kind of horizontal view of the world, we're unintentionally encouraging these silos. People are people. They want to achieve their KPIs and their OKRs. And we end up this kind of unintentional silos that break the flow of work. And then on top of that, we're encouraging, whether it's unintentional or not, is debatable, this command and control management. This idea that an external source is going to catch us from problems, is going to coordinate our change. And if you think about the complexity, think about that Death Star diagram of microservices, how can anybody be that external authority? And also, if we've all studied our Deming, right, that one of his main points is we have to cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality, right? That external inspection has yet to achieve high quality rather than building quality controls into the system. So what you see going on here is this new way, these horizontal self-regulating systems kind of based on DevOps plus SRE thinking and practices is actually starting to replace and rebuild what we did in the traditional ITSM world. And fundamentally, I think they're actually quite incompatible, but that's another longer discussion maybe for a different talk. But Rob England and Charles Betts, two faces probably familiar around here, may not agree with me with all this, but also great people to doing a great job of documenting how this world is fundamentally changing. So moving along, we know that we've got the digital transformation is driving our new architectures. We've got a new way to run our people. And one of the things we've realized is, what have we got going on here, right? We've got this extreme complicated microservices architectures combined with the go speed. We're really living in a world it's a complex world. And I think Paul Reed has done a great job of breaking this down to say that from the development side, people often think it's very deterministic. We know how Nginx works, and if there's a bug, we'll see it right there. But once you get into that Death Star diagram of microservices and understanding the user traffic that is unpredictable going on there, we've really moved into a complex system. And if you know anything about complex systems, it's that we can't perfectly predict what the behavior is going to be. We can't just break it down and say, I understand how Nginx works, I understand how MySQL works, therefore I understand how this complicated system is going to work. And so we have to start thinking about it in terms of we're actually living in this kind of complex world. And people who work in operations, I'm sure all of you have felt this for a long time, right? And there's a seminal paper. Richard Cook, he's not a technologist. He has spoken here before. He's an anesthesiologist, but famous researcher nonetheless. Wrote this great paper, early 90s actually, about how complex systems fail. And I highly recommend everybody look it up and read it. It will, definitely, I think, change your mind if you're already on this idea that you cannot stop failure happening in a complex world. You can only cope with it. And a great thought that Charity Majors had, which is a very pithy way of saying things, that distributed systems have an infinite list of almost impossible failure scenarios, right? Hindsight bias, we always say, oh, we should have seen that coming. But the reality is, it's almost impossible, right? And it's never going to happen again. And as you see, talk to people in organizations who have spent a lot of time in resilience engineering and trying to improve their operations, it only gets weirder as you go, right? So that kind of brings us to this idea of safety science and resilience engineering and how that's starting to influence our world. And these folks, Dr. Woods, Dr. Cook, Sidney Decker, these are folks who are, they're famous in the real world, and they study things like aircraft disasters, nuclear power plant, incidents, healthcare disasters. There's decades and billions of dollars of research and time and effort that has gone around the world into these domains, and they're now bringing them into our world. Well, why is that? I thought John Allspaw, who's one of the people really responsible for bringing this line of thinking into our world, he talks a lot about this, where he says that the reality is there's kind of above the line and below the line. Above the line is all the things that we think we're doing, right? And we see the people, we see abstractions, right? We see abstractions. But the reality is the real system is underneath those abstractions. and we actually can't see it. We can never really get to it. It's just there. All that we have is an idea in our head of what that actually is, right? And my idea of what it is and your idea of what it is, even though we're talking about the same thing, is probably very different. So really, the only way we can manage these, have a hope of managing these systems, is to worry about the interaction between the people who have to work on the systems so we can learn together, so we can stay on the same page. So really, it's about the people, just like it's about the people flying airplanes. It's about the people operating in the operating room, right? It's the human management side is the difficult part, and this above the line, below the line metaphor I think is great for to understand why. So that's kind of come into our industry now, and more folks to follow. There's Paul. He actually runs this conference called Redeploy. I call it more like a gathering. It is now like the epicenter of the resilience engineering folks who have taken these ideas from the broader world, from high consequence domains, and bring them to managing the complex world that we live in. And they hate slogans, so I'm going to put their stuff they're talking about in bumper stickers just to make them mad. They talk about things like there is no root cause, right? That that's just a political distinction, right? The idea that yes, human beings like to draw things in a straight line. We like to cast blame somewhere. Going back to the earliest times, there was always the idea of an act of God, right? We want to cast blame in some place, when the reality is, where we stop, right, is not actually a root cause. There's still many contributing factors going into that. So it's a fascinating world to get into. In the same way they'll poke apart why the 5 whys is actually doesn't achieve what we want to achieve. There's a new idea of safety 1 and safety 2, that in the old world, safety 1 was we study the problems. That's how we stop future problems. We keep worrying about what went wrong and figuring out. In the safety 2 model, they flip it around and say, well, what went right? Because the reality is we realize that the same things that people do day in, day out that make the business run, that same effort, the same activities people do in a slightly different context, a slightly different combination, causes disaster, right? So if we don't understand why your systems actually work, because it's probably a miracle that they often do in the first place, then we're not going to understand why they don't work. So it's a very interesting view of the world. And I love this idea, which is incidents equal unplanned investments, right? The question is just what's the ROI that you're going to get out of it. So kind of you put all this together, really where we're going with this is it's about elevating the human, right? How do we get more of the Iron Man model, right? Where we know we have to put the human, and how do we support the human, and how do we give them the tools and that they need to get their job done? Not this idea that we're going to build robots that are somehow going to run these complex systems. And trust me, those other domains, they've spent billions of dollars and decades trying to get the human out of the operating room, the human out of the airplane, the human out of the power plant, and they haven't figured out a way to do it. We're probably not going to solve it on our end. And also, you see the other movement, which is this idea of that ops work doesn't have to be miserable, right? On-call doesn't have to be miserable. How can we focus on elevating the human? And they are our best assets. How do we stop burning them out? And I think a very good conversation happened on this stage. Christina Maslach, who John Willis and Gene Kim brought into this world, another world-famous researcher. She actually goes on 60 Minutes, talks about, human burnout, has really identified what burnout comes from, what the causes are. And it's not just overwork, right? There's a lot of other contributing factors, but it's really kind of brought a lot to this domain. Folks like Jane Grohl, trying to identify and highlight who are the humans behind this and how do we elevate them. And why we want to do this is there's, this came from someone's S1 I wrote, there's 18 million IT operations professionals on the planet. That includes networking and everything. And there's 22 million developers, right? And how can we make all their lives a little bit better? So that was the context that we're living in. Now let's actually talk about the cycle of an incident. And I kind of broke it down into these three areas, so we can kind of break down, see what people are doing. Observe, react. I'm sorry, next slide. Observe, react, and learn. If you notice, this kind of feels a lot like an OODA loop, right? If you don't know what that is, OODA loop is something that was originally devised by a Air Force colonel, John Boyd, kind of very famous in the warfighter community, really talking about that all tactical deployment, all tactical activity you do involves observing something, orienting yourself to what you're seeing, making a decision on what you're going to do, and then acting. And how fast you can go through that is how effective you can be in operating. in their scenario, it came out first with airplane dogfighting. If you can go through your OODA loop faster than someone else goes through OODA loop, you're going to win the dogfight. It's a really fascinating a field to look into. This is actually the first drawing that he ever did of the OODA loop. It's so famous in the military world. It's featured in the Marine Corps Museum as a founding document. And so I'll put the little orient in the side on this map there for the OODA loop purists. But let's talk about what's going on the observe side, right? Monitoring, this one we've known for a long time. Spotting the unknowns. Spotting the knowns. How do we set the traps to look for the problems that have happened in the past? But talking about these complex systems, talking about the idea that there's this infinite number of failure scenarios, how can we look for those patterns? We can't, right? And that's where this field of observability is coming in, which is really about interrogating the unknowns, right? How do we look at the unknown events? How do we look at the activity of our systems and break down and try to use the human to figure out what is actually happening? And really kind of breaks down into these three parts. Number one is logging, right? That's the event. We need a record of the event. There's metrics, right? Which are data points over time, right? We've lost all context of the event, but we can know, like, is this number higher or lower than it was before? It's an important kind of leg of the three-legged observability stool. And the third one being tracing, right? Those events in the context of a single request, right? So how do we look at all the events that happen in the context of a single request from the human perspective? Charity Majors and Adrian Cole, two folks that I highly recommend following in this particular area. And then there's a new kid on the block in the observe world. That's this idea of automated governance, right? That in the enterprise we can't forget about the controls we need to put in place and to make sure they're being followed. It's an emerging thing. John Willis has been working a lot on this. There was a DevOps. The DevOps Enterprise Summit, Gene, IT Revolution runs a forum. A lot of people got together, wrote a paper on this. I think they have it available at one of the booths somewhere. But the idea is all this idea of the monitoring, the observability, the governance, how do we put that in the hands of everybody? No longer that it's in the hands of a few for them to have isolated views of these things, but how do we diffuse these three facets of observation, of visibility, and spread them to everybody so they can actually take action, right? So kind of moving along here on our cycle, there's the idea of, all right, we've gone from we're seeing what's going on. Now we got to start orienting ourselves to it and make a decision of what we're going to do. Where's that going? So first step here is incident command, right? So mobilizing, coordinating, communication between the people, right? And a lot of this starts back with something that came from the government side again, the incident command system. Now it's under the auspices of FEMA, but a lot of study for how do you mobilize and communicate and coordinate human beings to go resolve a issue. And one of the first people in our community that really kind of brought this in was Jesse Robbins. I used to call him the master of disaster, kind of ran the early game days at Amazon, was really one of the big proponents of we have to break things to learn from things, right? And then guys like Brent Chapman, now over at Slack, doing the same thing. Ernest Mueller, another, I think, a good influence in this area, as well as the folks at PagerDuty. They've actually kind of started to document and open source in this GitHub project their incident response plan, all based on this incident command system. I just put Matt Stratton there because I think he does a great job of explaining to the world. I'm sure there's other people who are also doing a lot of work there. So the next sort of thing is, well, we're going to be mobilizing our people, right? Who are we mobilizing? And there's this kind of split that we see going on, this to kind of divide and conquer, that operations, it's getting very blurry, right? Well, first it's started to get very blurry. I don't know, this is our t-shirt, the very first DevOps Days Mountain View, the first one in the US. Andrew Schaefer was one of his ideas, which was, ops who are devs, who like devs to be ops, who do ops like they're devs, who do dev like they're ops. And if you were a teenager in the 90s, you know what the refrain is after that. And so we saw this blurring, and now we kind of see this division that's starting to take place, where you see organizations saying, look, we're going to take what was traditionally the operations domain, and we're going to split it into two distinct capabilities. One is platform engineering, right, which looks more like a product or development team, and that's a centralized organization, right? And then we're going to take the build and operate. Sorry, I have the same thing on my slide here, but the people who operate the systems, right? The people who are, and that's going to be a distributed function. That's some people call it SRE, some people call it other things, but there's the distributed function that is embedded in all the teams that is doing the actual, running of the systems, and that is distributed. Platform engineering is centralized. If you follow the folks at Disney who presented here, I think today. It's a great, they're doing a lot of work in this area. On the other side of the world, Sean Norris, who was at JPMC, Standard Chartered, now at Pivotal, also was driving kind of large scale in the financial world operations towards this way too. This kind of divide and conquer. So, we've got our people. We've got their instant command system. We're motivating. We're moving them towards this, towards doing something. I think it's interesting to see the view on escalations, right? That there's kind of two themes here. One is avoid them at all costs, right? How do we push control closer to the people who first spot and respond to the problems? Jody Mulkey, former CTO of Ticketmaster, did a lot of fascinating work there. It took their MTTR from like 40-something minutes for major events down to like 4 minutes. It's like 100%, It's all from pushing control closest to the problem, right? Instead of having to escalate up through that. And John Halligan comes back in here. I think it's a really interesting job of bringing this idea of swarming that came out of the kind of traditional human call center service management world, and saying, instead of having these escalation trees, build organizations that have capabilities to swarm, so you make sure that you're getting the problem to the right person as soon as possible, dramatically cutting down on these escalation chains. And then come along the return of runbooks, right? That something I know a lot about, but being able to take action, diagnose things, restore your problems. Runbooks kind of disappeared for a while. They were big in the enterprise, the configuration management world. Told us there's going to be no ops. We didn't need runbooks. But now, thanks to the SRE movement, runbooks are back, and specifically runbook automation, right? So something that my colleague and I, Alex Honor, we focus a lot on, which is, how do you give safe self-service access to the expert knowledge that you need to take action, right? So, the knowledge part, it's easy to move the bits, right? You've got the scripts, you've got the APIs, you've got the command line, right? But how do you take that knowledge out of the subject matter experts and formalize it and distribute it in the organization so those closest to the problem can use it, right? It's got to be self-service, right? Again, we have to empower those closest to the problem. We got to get rid of those escalations. And it's got to be safe. Not only safe from, let's mistake-proof it as much as we can to not make, to hand it off, to make smart choices, guardrails for people not to make problems, but also safe from the auditor and the compliance perspective as well. And because before runbook automation, no matter how good we were at that first half of the cycle, what happens, right? One of three things. Either we're trying to decipher the wiki. Is this thing right? When was this written? What's this person trying to say, right? Or we're kind of doing this ad hoc tool script usage, like, oh, what they tell me on Tuesday? It's not -i, it's -e, or is this even the right version of the script? But most likely, what we're doing is escalating on up, right? Someone else is going to be able to solve this problem. But with runbook automation, we're empowering those people closest to those, to those signals to actually go ahead and take action by coordinating that, taking that knowledge, turn it into automation that can coordinate all of the incantations of the scripts and the tools and the APIs that we go and need to do it. And kind of illustration is you talk about like sort of the old way, right? It's like, well, okay, this is kind of cartoonish, obviously, but the level one, now there's a problem. It's a problem with that service. So let's call the SRE or the on-call for that service. And they go, oh, this is a problem with the application. They call the developer on call. They go, there's no data. It must be a database problem. They call the DBA. DBA shows up and goes, oh, this is a network problem, right? So we're spending all this time escalating up, and it's probably this larger blast radius than all of that. Versus, what if? And also, while that's happening, as I said before, we're injecting all of this, delay into our organization, taking people off of the other work they should be doing. And with runbook automation, it's like, well, how do we empower that level one with all of the knowledge of those different subject matter experts to go and first diagnose that problem, and if they can't solve it right there, they know who to escalate to, right? Better yet, in the enterprise, problems happen over and over and over again. So if we can give them, hey, here is the check to see if this problem has existed, run all these checks, and the one that you see, here's the action you can go to take and repair that. We see people talking about 80, 90% reduction in the time it takes to resolve these known incidents that happen over and over again. And also, we're stopping those interruptions. That all that times that the subject matter experts are being interrupted, we're putting two painful things in the organization. One is interruptions, and the other is waiting, right? Someone has to now delay and wait for somebody. And then, so you're being interrupted all day long, and then it comes time to go do something. What happens? You're now waiting in somebody else's queue for somebody else to do something, right? So, another area where Rundeck automation is used very successfully is being able to provide people with the self-service, so you don't have to constantly be in that chain. And now that we're getting in the DevOps world, and we got to cross-functional teams, we've got to get into let developers do restarts in production, build and run teams. You build it, you run it. How are we actually going to do that, right? And with Rundeck automation, you're actually being able to say, hey, instead of just saying, hey, here's an SSH key and some pseudo privileges and a shell script and say a prayer and have a good time, we can say, hey, let's give them named access to these particular procedures, and that's how we're going to get around these security and compliance issues, because we're able to run it through an SDLC. We're able to do a code review, operations, security, say, yes, this is good. Then let's use the access control to turn it around and let somebody else do it. I don't know if you saw this earlier this week, but Bhavik Gudka from Capital One was talking about the custom system that they built. Does a very similar thing. And the whole idea is Runbooks as a service is to take all this and to centralize it, because they want to do two things. One is they want to rapidly be able to know, is this a known problem? Let's try the known fix. And if it's not, let's figure out as fast as possible how to, through the automated system, how to call the right diagnostics so we know who to escalate it to. And then, kind of wrapping up here, we got the learn part, right? Now, usually that circle kind of the OODA loop is at the top half of there, right? The observe and react. But after the incident comes the learning, right? And again, you should look at a lot of things that John Allspaw has been talking about. But he talks about how the problem is in many enterprises, we think the value is the action items, right? So some people like, oh, I'll do email, I'll send an email ahead of time. Maybe we'll begrudgingly get together to talk about the postmortem. Maybe we'll do a report. And all the execs want to know is what's the action items, right? And the reality is there's very little value in that. You're probably going to actually create more problems that will cause more outages in the future, or not really get the real problems. The real value is in the journey along the way, right? The focus on the learning, the storytelling, understanding all the contributing factors, change people's minds towards it's not about the outcome of the action items, it's about that collective understanding, so we have a better understanding of how our above-the-line action helps the below-the-line action. And again, why? Because these incidents are unplanned investments, right? And the ROI is up to us. The money's already being spent. The money's already being blown. How can we make that money less? But also, how can we get the most value out of it for the organization? It's an investment in the survivability in the future of your organization. So, to recap, don't forget all the things that we're stewing in. If a lot of people jump to talking about we're just going to fix these just change how we do incident management, the reality is we don't bring people through the path of how we got to where we are and what the contributing factors are in our industry. It's going to be hard just to jump to the answers. And then look to what a lot of these organizations are doing across these different parts of this cycle. So my name is Damon Edwards. That's my talk. Again, the slides are there. You can hit me on Twitter anytime you want, or just email me directly. We'll be at the Rundeck booth the rest of the day over in the exhibit hall if you want to talk about any of these things. And enjoy lunch. Thank you.